This message is brought to you by DoNotAge.org, the longevity research organisation that's on a mission to extend health span for as many people as possible via products that actually work. Start your journey today at DoNotAge.org and use code LLAMA for a 10% discount. That's LLAMA.
I want to have a high quality of life as long as I possibly can, and that's why I track consistently. Even though I'm not necessarily sick now, I use it as my own longevity strategy. That's what the numbers are for, ultimately.
Hello and welcome to the Live Long and Master Aging podcast. I'm Peter Bowes. This is where we explore the science and stories behind human longevity. Now, something we often talk about here is data. So important, of course, if you're tracking your everyday health, and extremely important in scientific research, whether it's big data associated with large population studies or small data, the kind you and I collect about ourselves every day, or the lab test results that our doctors have been storing for years. Thanks to body computing gadgets, we are more awash with data than ever before. We monitor our heart rates, blood pressure, body fat, body mass index, sometimes without even realizing that we have that information because the watch or band on our wrist is far more sophisticated than we realize. So some of us glance at the data occasionally, others monitor it obsessively to try to spot trends and help us manage our lifestyles and perhaps our longevity. Well, whichever category you come in, a common challenge is how best to curate or manage that information, which is where today's guest comes in. David Korsunsky is the founder and CEO of Heads Up Health, an online service which helps bring together and store all of those test results and daily metrics and present them in a way which, frankly, can be really useful. Dave, welcome to the Live Long and Master Aging podcast.
Thank you, Peter. It's exciting to be here. Looking forward to our conversation.
It's an exciting project that you're involved in. How did it start for you?
I'd always had a personal passion in my own level of performance and looking for ways that I could perform better at work, perform better physically, look better physically. So I was always interested in the testing and the technology. And as I learned more about different ways to measure health, I realized that everything I was testing was its own separate product. So I had a lot of interesting data, but none of it was talking to each other. It seemed like a really obvious problem that should have been solved by now. But as I dug deeper, it turns out it hadn't. It's been solved in every industry except healthcare, it turns out. And so I just started looking at different ways to address the problem. It was right around that time that I actually started dealing with some of my own health issues. And I was 30 years old, always physically fit, healthy, and I had some very unpleasant effects from chronic stress. And so I now started looking at all this information that I had in front of me and saying, how can I start using this data to work on my stress issue? And put it all into a big, massive Excel spreadsheet. And when I did that, I could actually see trends and patterns that were not visible before. And so just putting the lab test results into a spreadsheet, even though they'd come from 3 different doctors, allowed me to see trends that were not present. It also allowed me to share that information with non-conventional doctors. So these are doctors who would be considered functional medicine, ancestral health, nutritionists who are not necessarily going to prescribe. They are going to work with you around lifestyle intervention. So I shared my spreadsheet with a doctor in Austin, Texas. And he was able to find exactly what was going on, subclinical thyroid issues that were missed by the conventional lab testing, issues related to digestive health that were exacerbating the stress. And so we just made the whole process around the data that I was collecting. And it got me, a layperson. I was in the technology world. I didn't understand a lot of these numbers. I think they're intimidating for a lot of people when you see the test results from the doctor. We tend to blindly defer to the doctor to interpret these numbers and tell us if they're good or bad. But actually, when the individual starts looking and looks a little bit further under the surface, you find that the numbers are not intimidating. And so I had a very good outcome by using this spreadsheet with a doctor. And then I said, okay, we need to build this into a software program that anybody can use. Because I realized how powerful the numbers are when they're to use your terminology, curated properly.
And of course, what you have there is access to data that none of your individual health providers have. You have everything because
That's right.
It's your data, but they have only what their lab has orchestrated.
That's right. They have a snapshot of your information. Everyone within the United States has moved from a new city, maybe moved to the other end of the same city, or moved to a different city, moved to the other side of the country, changed doctors, changed insurance plans. So your current doctor doesn't have the information from the previous doctors. So he's got maybe 24, 36 months of information on you. But when you go back to your previous doctors and put it all together, you can see back decades. And you can start to learn a lot more about your health even than your doctor because you have way more history. So we have users on our system who have pieced together their medical history inside of our software, and they're seeing the signs of disease years or decades before they even got diagnosed, but it wasn't visible to their current doctor. He didn't have those trends. So what we want to do is pull every piece of medical information together in one place in a way that's accessible for people so that they can study this information just like they study the balance in their bank account, for example, or the performance of a stock. That doesn't really exist in healthcare, and it needs to exist in healthcare because the environment that we place our bodies in today is almost stacked against our evolutionary biology. So we're starting to develop a lot of chronic conditions because of our environment, our food, our lifestyle, our air quality, our water quality. So we just want to give people the data so that they can be empowered, spot these trends, and just get more engaged.
So you had the idea to do this, based in large part on your own personal
experiences.
Absolutely. It's one thing having the idea; it's another actually seeing it through to create what you actually have done now. So I'm wondering. And my first thought, obviously, is curating health data. There are all sorts of confidentiality issues involved here. Where did you start?
As I look back on the process, I first went back and learned how to code software. I was between jobs at the time, so I spent about 6 months learning web development and learning how to build web applications. And I built this prototype myself. And the prototype was able to log into the University of California at San Francisco, which was where I had some blood work, pull the blood work out. Was able to log into Fitbit, pull out some data on sleep and physical activity. I'm like, okay, this is getting pretty close to what I think the larger system should do. And then, Peter, I almost just became like a man possessed. It was like 2 years went by in the blink of an eye, and I had just turned into a maniac building this thing. And I wasn't thinking, I took all of my personal money. I didn't think about the consequences. I just went for it 100%. I said, you know what? If one person emails me and says this made a difference in their life, I'll consider the whole project a success. That was the only metric that mattered in my mind. I'm like, I need to build this. And I just went for it. And it's been now 3 years, and we're just starting to really get some good traction going.
And what sort of response did you get from the providers, from the laboratories, from the medical institutions providing the data? I'm guessing that they would have been initially perhaps quite hesitant and cautious about essentially allowing you access.
Yep. So the good news here in the United States is that around the 2014 timeframe, there was something called the HITECH Act introduced by the federal government, and it incentivized the doctors to move from paper records to making that information available in patient portals, which means just like you can log into your bank to check your balance, pay some bills, you can now do the same thing to get to your doctor records. A nice byproduct of that was that all of these patient portals had what's called an API, which for the tech nerds out there just means that it's a programming interface that software like mine can connect to, make a request on behalf of an individual, and electronically download the medical records. So that means that There's over 30,000 health systems in the U.S. where we can pull down your medical records instantly. Even if you've got medical records in more than one facility, we clean it all up. We have to use the same encryption and security and HIPAA guidelines that every other health system has to adhere to. That's also gotten a lot easier thanks to companies like Amazon, where you can build applications very quickly and the infrastructure is HIPAA compliant out of the box. So what would previously take 24 months and millions of dollars can now be stood up almost instantly. So it makes it very easy for applications to come to market and do things securely. So it's a perfect time, actually, to solve this problem. If we would have tried this 3 or 4 years ago, it would have been almost impossible. But thanks to regulatory change, technological change, it's now very easy for us to help individuals centralize all of their medical history.
And give us an idea of the kind of data that you're talking about. Clearly, if it's medical data, it's blood test results, it's urine test results, it's all the kinds of things that we have all the time at our doctor's office. Maybe it's routine healthcare, it might be targeted at a specific condition. But there are all sorts of other metrics as well that you can gather, data that you can collect yourself.
Yeah, the fundamental premise of our approach to this problem is that an individual needs to see their medical data, cholesterol levels, medication histories, inflammation markers, markers of diabetes. So those are the things you get when you go to the doctor. But we also need people to be able to see their lifestyle metrics because most of the chronic diseases we're dealing with are lifestyle in nature. Sedentary behavior, nutritional stress, etc. So you've got your medical records, your cholesterol readings, and you've got all the data you're collecting at home, some of the stuff you mentioned at the introduction.
Yeah, this thing on my wrist here.
Yeah, blood pressure, heart rate, sleep data. This information is being easily and passively collected. We don't really have to do anything. We just put something on the wrist, and this incredibly valuable data is being collected. That is measuring our lifestyle choices. And when you can help someone see how their lifestyle choices affect the clinical outcome, okay, when I dial down the carbohydrates significantly, my triglycerides go down. Okay, that's pretty cool. And if I improve my sleep quality and start getting solid sleep, I'm noticing my weight is going down. Okay, and there's reasons for that. So we want to pull that information together, lifestyle, clinical, and let people come to the conclusions themselves because it's different for everybody. Your struggles with a metabolic disease may be related to stress. My struggles may be related to diet. Another person's may be genetic. So we all have to turn the knobs and dials and tinker for ourselves. So that's what we want to do. We want to put your Fitbit data next to your medical records and give you the information you need to figure it out. And it's not that hard. And
I've started using it, and it's quite remarkable. One of the things that I've started, and I understand it's developing, it's going to get a lot easier to get your data in there. But it's interesting that you can, if you're into fasting, which I am, or periodic fasting, you can denote the dates that you've been fasting, maybe the 5-day periodic fast that I do, and you can look at the metrics around that to see, and especially weight, blood pressure, triglycerides, as you mentioned, if you have blood tests before and after your fasting period. The level of information is quite extraordinary that's available for us to use.
Yeah. I think the level of information is extraordinary in a number of different ways because not only do we have advanced systems like this now to quantify our health, our users know their health far better than their doctor. They're looking at this data every day. They're engaged in their health. They're working on it. They're doing the work. But now as consumers, we also have access to incredibly vast amounts of information through podcasts, through YouTube, the latest and greatest cutting-edge science. And you have lay people who are listening to the most cutting-edge research and actually are more educated than many of the healthcare professionals because they're just devouring content. So, and then we have the tools now to start quantifying this stuff using interventions like you described, where you fast for 18 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours. There's new studies out that show the entire immune system regenerates after 3 days of fasting, 72 hours. And we can measure that. And then go look at markers related to the immune system, white blood cell count, and other markers related to immune function. So it's amazing what we have access to, and we just want to make it as simple and as accessible as possible.
And of course, the temptation with sort of geeky mindset here is to do more and more tests. And you see one piece of information and think, oh, well, if only I knew that. And so if you're ordering your own blood tests, like some of us do, it can get expensive at times. But it's a level of fascination that not everyone has, but for those of us that want to delve really deep, it's there for the taking.
You know, one of the most surprising things, Peter, has been that our most active and engaged users are the least technically savvy people you could possibly imagine. And it's people who are sick, they have diabetes, they have obesity, they have cardiovascular-related disorders, they have PCOS. So yes, there is a subclass of people that are the real data nerds, like you and I, presumably.
Right.
But most of our users are just at the point in life where they're dealing with one or more chronic conditions. They've heard or read about something that they want to try, the ketogenic diet, for example, and they just go do it themselves.
And that's good to hear, because I think if you're going to make something like this, you want it to be accessible to as many people and a cross-section of the community as possible.
I think it's all just a numbers game. When you look at health and disease, there's numbers that represent disease, an elevated hemoglobin A1C. That's just a number. And we can look at some other numbers and try to make changes there. So one analogy I often use is you can certainly go to a doctor, and there's a perfectly legitimate time and place to get a prescription. All they're doing is trying to move that same number down. They're using a prescription-based modality. There are other modalities, fasting, carbohydrate restriction, lifestyle changes, that can also move that exact same number. And so we just see it as giving people the numbers. If you're sick, you know what numbers need to move. My close family member has a kidney disease and has to keep a very close eye on creatinine, for example. So he's not a medical person, but he knows that he needs to watch that specific number. So I just look at it as a numbers game and give people ways to tweak the numbers that are alternatives to what you might get from a typical prescribing doctor, for example.
And I mentioned inputting the data. I know one of the issues that you face, and we all face, and you kind of mentioned it at the beginning, that the data comes from many, many different sources. Some sources that actually no longer exist as an entity, but we might have a PDF on our computer, we might have a piece of paper that we've been filing in old-fashioned filing cabinet style. It's still possible, isn't it, to get that data into your system? And we'll continue this conversation in just a moment.
Hey, quick question for you. Are you someone who wants to be fit, healthy, and happy? And what if I told you could get your dream body by simply just listening to a podcast? I'm Josh.
And I'm KG, and we're the hosts of the Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast.
Listen, we get it. Fitness isn't easy. Carbs, no carbs.
Just stop, okay? It doesn't have to be that complicated. And that's why we made this podcast. We get straight to the facts so you can become your best you.
So the way to check us out is click the link in the show notes or search Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast on any of the major podcast platforms. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, so there's a couple ways that we handle that. The ideal scenario is you sign up for our system, you put in your doctor's name, and we do the sync electronically. The reality is that much health information is still on paper and PDF. There's a couple ways we handle that. One, we have a concierge service, where all you have to do is upload the document, and we have a transcriptionist, licensed medical professional in the United States, that will manually enter the data into your account. So for all of those historical records, we'll just manually key them in. That's just reality. We have to do that. The next thing we're working on in our system is building in the software that can automatically read the data out of the PDFs. So all you'll have to do is upload it, and our system will automatically extract it and save it. And now you can graph it and store it and run reports on it because it's now in a structured format. So that's the evolution of our product, where we want to be able to start ingesting PDF files, Word documents, any piece of information that you want to come into the system. We want to make it easy to get that into structured format. Structured format just means it's not in a PDF. It's graphable, it's chartable, it's numbers in a database.
For anyone hearing about this for the first time, can you give me an idea of your price base, what this service costs?
Yeah, so the software is $9 a month or $59 a year. So reasonably priced. Anyone can try it out for free for 30 days. You don't need a credit card. And link up some of your health data and start to get a feel for how this works. A lot of people don't think about managing their health this way. because this is new. We think about managing our money very carefully. We get an alert when our bank balance gets to a certain level. We can pull up the 52-week high on our stock instantly, but we can't pull up the 52-week high on our blood sugar. So for a lot of people, this is very new to get their head around. But once you start using it, you realize the level of control that you have over your health just by carefully tracking and lifestyle modification. The symptoms of many chronic diseases can be eliminated within a matter of weeks once you learn how to properly make the changes.
And you mentioned that if you received one email from someone who had said that this was a positive impact on their life, have you had that email or many emails presumably?
That's the best part, is connecting with people. Every email that comes in to our support address, I read first. And I'll respond to the best of my ability. And I'll always ask, how did you hear about us? And I'll always ask what a little bit about someone's story, and I've made so many great friends just by doing it that way. A lot of people that have become near and dear friends with me on Facebook or even personally, much like yourself. So it's been incredibly rewarding. My compass, we're a mission-driven company. So all I care about is building something that helps people. That is my true north. And then if there's financial success that comes with it, great. But at the end of the day, I just keep the empathy for the people who are struggling with their health as my primary goal.
Now, you mentioned this started with your own health issues and
Yes.
health concerns. A question I often ask guests on this podcast is, in terms of your own personal long-term health and longevity, is longevity something you think of? Do you have a goal in mind?
I can't say that I have a specific numerical goal. I think everything I'm doing about my health now is for longevity. For example, some of the things I think a lot about are cancer prevention. Most of the time we think about cancer treatment, but a lot of the things you and I are testing, things like CBD oil, things like ketogenic diets, things like fasting, I look at those as my disease prevention strategies. So that's my reason for engaging in this stuff now. That is ultimately a longevity goal. I want to have a high quality of life as long as I possibly can, and that's why I track consistently, even though I'm not necessarily sick now. Yeah, I like to see if I can push down the body fat and get the abs to show a little bit now that it's April, May. But at the end of the day, seeing the chronic disease in my own family and seeing it epidemic, for me, I use it as my own longevity strategy. That's what the numbers are for, ultimately.
And when you read your own data, as you log into your own site, is there, and I'm sure we all probably have our own favourites, the data that we look at, whether it's just the number of steps or...
Indeed, we all have our own favorites.
It is.
Everybody's dashboard inside of Heads Up Health is different.
What's yours?
My top 3 numbers on my system are my sleep data, which comes from something called the Oura Ring. And I'm also very carefully tracking heart rate variability, which is a number I'm sure you've talked about considerably on this show. It's one of the core metrics, in my understanding, associated with interventions designed to target longevity increases. Is this improving my heart rate variability? Quite simply, it's a measurement of stress within the body. And most people think of stress as a mental thing. I'm stressed because of a work or life situation or something going on. Few people realize that you can actually measure that. And when you can measure it, you can improve upon it. That's heart rate variability. In its most basic form, you just put it, I'm sure you talked about this, you put a chest strap on, you fire up an app, and it measures HRV. So that's my primary metric. The other one that is really important for me is my blood sugar first thing in the morning. And when I'm just eating a regular Western diet, it's about 95 milligrams per deciliter when I'm like fully topped off in terms of glucose. But within a couple days of eating the same amount of net calories but just dialing down the carbs, I'll get that into the high 70s. That's when I start feeling the best. That's when I have my best appetite control. It's when I'm feeling and performing my best. So I'd say sleep, heart rate variability, fasting blood sugar are my 3 main metrics.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people would agree with you. Sleep, especially, often, if you make a list in terms of what's important to you, sleep is always my number 1.
Yeah, cool. Same here. And the ability to now look at, I've learned a lot about my own, there's a term sleep hygiene, which just means how do you prepare for bed? Those 2 or 3 hours leading up to bedtime actually have a huge impact on the quality of the sleep. And when you start measuring sleep, there's a huge difference between 2 hours where you get, or 2 different nights. Both can report 7 hours of quote-unquote sleep. But when you actually look at the numbers, on one of them you had significant amounts of restorative deep sleep, and the next night you had 0 deep sleep. Why? That's the restorative sleep that we need and we crave. And you start to learn that, wow, when I eat a late dinner and I go to bed and my body's still digesting food, my deep sleep is down. Or when I'm, for example, having more than 2 glasses of alcohol on a given night, you'll start to see these things for yourself. And just seeing those numbers can help you figure out how to optimize. So those are some of the things that I've started to learn. Just a good night's sleep, there's so many things that have to go right once you really start to learn it. But when it does, you start to appreciate it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, sleep's a big one for me, too.
And you've just gone right to the heart of the matter. As you answered that question, you talked about alcohol, eating late, and that routine that you go through.
Sure.
I think if we've been interested, we've probably known these things for some time, but it's until you actually tabulate everything and see it there in front of you as data, and you can match one factor with another.
Absolutely.
That's when the real light bulb goes off, and you're kind of proving things to yourself as opposed to believing what you read or you're told by a medical profession. Once you prove it to yourself, with yourself as the n equals 1, that's when it hits home, isn't it?
There's so much information out there. You can go online and ask a question and get 50 different answers about how to work on your health condition. The only certainty is the numbers you collect yourself. So absolutely, to your point, once you see it for yourself, it becomes real. And once you can have someone who's engaged in these numbers and actively tracking, that is a win. Now that person is consciously aware of these things. So I think that's where I want all of this to go.
Let me ask you the lifestyle question again. I know this interests a lot of people, and it's a familiar question on this podcast and others as well. But in terms of your day, and you've learned a lot about yourself through the data that you have access to, how do you start your day?
Typically, I will put my phone on airplane mode the night before. And so it's plugged in and just completely off. And I like to wake up in the morning, and I like to do a little bit of meditation and some journaling before I even turn that thing on, and the barrage of things that have been waiting for me flood my day. Once that happens, all bets are off. The odds of me getting a meditation session in once the stimulation has started are extremely low. So ideally, I like to start with the phone off and do a little bit of journaling. I typically like to write out some of the things that I'm working on most prominently in my life. Just make sure that I'm reestablishing those, do a short meditation session. Then I'll go to the coffee shop. I'm living in a small town up in Truckee, California. So I'll saunter over to the coffee shop around 7 a.m. and have my coffee and then start my day, which is usually very task-oriented just because of the nature of what I do. So I manage that as best I can. If I get a few things off of the task list in the midst of all the chaos, it was a good day. Exercise is super important for me, and that can come in any format as long as I'm really breaking a sweat to get the endorphins going in my brain and just the benefits that come with regular physical exercise daily. It's starting to warm up, so I'm starting to sit outside and get some sun on the white skin. My most recent labs showed that my vitamin D was too low, and that's implications in all kinds of different signaling within the body.
I heard the other day that doctors often discover, bizarrely here in California, where people avoid the sun,
makes no
sense. They have low vitamin D.
Yeah, exactly. So and then the evenings I try to wind things down. Occasionally I'll have calls with people that I work with that are in Asia, so there's the occasional calls that are late night, but just trying to wind down. And one thing I've learned about my own circadian rhythm, everybody's is different. My circadian rhythm works best when I'm in bed by 9 p.m., read a book, asleep by 9:30, and up early in the morning. I don't do that every single night, but if I want to get the best possible restorative recovery, that's the ideal routine for me. And there's days where you make a conscious choice not to do that. You're out with friends, you're eating a huge dinner at 8:30 p.m. at night and having some wine, and that's a conscious decision. But I try to engineer things based on what I know works best for my body.
I feel pretty much the same way, that left to my own devices, that is the kind of ideal lifestyle, to get up just before sun rises, to be up and about and ideally outside as the sun is rising. Doesn't always happen, but I think that's great. And to be in bed by, as you say, 9 or maybe 10 o'clock at night and get a good solid 8 hours sleep.
Without
it's not as you say, it's not going to happen every day because
exactly.
the modern world gets in the way.
Absolutely. You get 2 or 3 of those a week, or even 2 or 3 of those in a row, and my body is just right back to 100% strength. And with the travel and the things that I do, all of the conferences I attend, when I get that week back home and I just start to, again, I track it also, get 2 or 3 or 4 of those days where I'm just into that routine, then I'm ready to take on the world again. So it's a best effort basis.
I think it's great. Coming back to the site, I know it's a work in progress and you're constantly developing it. Yep. What is next on the horizon for you? I know you're working on mobile.
Yeah, we are working on our mobile app. I decided to start with a web-based product because we're pulling in lots of information, and it's just too much for a small screen, especially when you're looking at 15 years of medical tests.
I find my large screen at home is the best to look at your site on because you've got lots of columns there.
Exactly. We started that way. Now we're building the mobile portion of it, and then for us to be successful, we need to integrate the tools that people are already using. So we work very hard on integrating things like MyFitnessPal and integrating new technology like the Oura Ring. There's a new glucometer ketone meter on the market, the Keto Mojo, making sure that automatically syncs. Some of the heart rate variability apps we're just starting to integrate. So if you can sign up for our service and say, oh, there's my 2 favorite things I use to track my health, and they're seamlessly integrated. So we spend a lot of the time working on those integrations, Elite HRV, Keto Mojo being 2 of the next ones that we're working on. So I think mobile, continued integrations, and then where we'd like to get to is now starting to build intelligence into the system. Machine learning and being able to say to Peter automatically, hey, Peter, we noticed that, for example, it's been 8 days since your last blood sugar check. Or without you having to log in and do the graphing yourself, we noticed a very strong correlation between your deep sleep, for example, and your carbohydrate intake.
So it'll do the analysis for you.
Very non-obvious correlations that a human mind would not even really ever think of putting together. That's what we want to start to be able to surface because it is also individualized. So building that level of intelligence, I think, is where we want to get to as part of the long-term vision.
David, it's a really exciting project. I wish you all the best with it.
Yes, thank you, Peter. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Good to see you. And the website, once again, is
headsuphealth.com.
headsuphealth.com. I'll put that information in the show notes for this episode on our website, which is LLAMApodcast.com, LLAMA podcast.com. And while you're at the site, you might want to have a rummage around and listen to some of our archived interviews. There's an index there. You can go back to the beginning of the podcast and listen to some of the other guests as well. Many thanks for listening. Health optimization is what this podcast is all about, and that means taking care of our mitochondria, the energy centers of our cells. Physical strength, avoiding frailty is key, and that's why the science behind urolithin A and the work of Timeline Nutrition is so interesting. You can find out more and get a discount code at our website and in the show notes for this episode.